everybody, it's Mr. G. Welcome to this episode of Just Corvette Crazy. It's really exciting around the shop today. Let me tell you why. The 2002 Z06 is finally getting a new set of performance racing valve springs. So stick around, I'll show you how it's done and why we're doing it. Hey folks, this is Mr. G and welcome to Just Corvette Crazy. On this channel we talk about Corvettes, we fix some Corvettes, and we love to drive our Corvettes. So if you like what you see, hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel out a lot. Thanks. Hey, thanks for sticking around. So first of all, let me talk about the reason why we're doing this swap of the valve springs. The 2002 Z06 came with an LS6 engine. Somewhere in 2002 up through 2003, General Motors got a bad batch of valve springs. They were subject to breaking more frequently than what they've seen before. So there's no warning, there's no amount of kilometers or miles on the car, the valve springs just break. This car here has only got 40,000 kilometers on it. So I have decided, just as a precaution, to replace this valve springs. Now the valve springs that I've decided to go with are from PAC. They're a performance racing spring. They are the 1218 racing spring, which is what is prescribed, if you will, for the Z06 LS6 engine. Now, how do you know if your car has already had the upgrade to different springs? The valve springs that were in the 2002 2003 Z06 models with the LS6 engine were yellow. So if you crack open your oil filler and you look down there with a light and you see yellow valve springs, that's how you know that they are original to that car and have not been replaced. The new ones from GM are blue. So if you crack that open and you look inside and you see blue valve springs, then it's already been upgraded. I decided to go with the PAC racing springs. No particular reason other than I hear that they last longer. They're a performance spring for racing with really good endurance. So I decided to upgrade to that particular spring. Alright, so let's spend a couple of minutes talking about the parts and tools required to do this job. Well, first of all, what you need is a set of valve springs. So I've chosen the PAC model 1218. So that is the ones that are prescribed for this car. You also need a valve spring tool. So I picked up this one. This is for LS engines, and basically it is a tool that will compress the valve springs while the heads are still on the car. That's important. We don't want to have to pull the heads out in order to do this job. So there are valve spring compression tools available for the LS engines where we can actually do this job while the heads are sitting on the engine. When we remove the springs, there's a risk that the valves will fall into the block. We don't want that to happen. There are a number of methods that can be used to keep the valves from falling into the engine while you're doing the job. The method I am using is compressed air. So I picked up this little hose, and the idea is this hose will thread into where your spark plugs are, and then this connects to your compressor. So what happens is compressed air goes in and into the cylinder, and compressed air will keep the valves up into the head and stop them from falling down into the block while you're doing the job. So you do one cylinder at a time, and you move the hose from spark plug hole to spark plug hole as you do it. A couple other little things that you're going to require. You are going to require a torque wrench. Torque wrench needs to be able to do 22 foot-pounds and 9 foot-pounds of torque. So make sure that the torque wrench that you have can do 22 pounds and 9 pounds. Last but not least, a little convenient, a magnet. Once you compress the valve springs, you have to remove the keepers. It is real easy to drop those keepers into the head. So what we want to do is we want to grab them with a magnet as we take them out. So let the magnet grab them, not your chubby little fingers. So grab them with the magnet and then remove them from the car. So those are the tools that you require to do this job, amongst your regular other hand tools. So we're going to get started on disassembly. So we're going to remove the plastic covers from the fuel rails. You're going to remove your spark plugs. You're going to remove the coil packs. And then eventually you're going to get to the valve covers and you'll remove those. So that's what we're going to do first. So stay tuned. Okay, so we're going to start the disassembly. The first thing I'm going to do is remove the plastic covers for the fuel rail. I'm also going to disconnect the negative side of the battery just to be safe. So now what we're going to do is we're going to work on removing the coil pack and get that out of the way. But in order to do that, we need to unplug our spark plugs. So basically we have 4 on each side. Alright, so I've got the plug wires removed from each individual coil. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to disconnect the wiring harness and then remove the coil pack. Alright, so remove the wire harness, just pull it up and out, tuck it away somewhere out of the way. And then we've got 1, 2, and 3, and 4 bolts to remove, and then the coil pack should come up. So we'll give this a go with 10mm deep socket. So way back in the corner, next to the firewall. And out comes the coil pack. So now with the coil pack out of the way, we want to remove the other end of the plugs. So the other end of the plug wires. Alright, so all 4 spark plug wires are out on this side. That's what they look like. They do take quite a bit of tugging to get them off the plugs themselves, but they will come off. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is remove the 4 spark plugs on this side of the engine. And then we will go ahead and remove the valve cover. Alright, so 4 plugs are out on this side of the car. Let me show you what I do. Every time I remove spark plugs, I create a little holder like this. So, front of the car, rear of the car, passenger side, driver's side. And then I can put the plugs in the position that they came out in the car, and I can examine each plug once I have them all out to make sure that the car is doing well, healthy, doesn't have any leaks, not running rich. So far these plugs look pretty good. So the next thing that we have to remove is the line for the PVC system. And now we can remove the 4 bolts that are holding the valve cover on. So those are 8 mil. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, and 4 bolts, and that should all be what's holding the valve cover on, and out we come. So what comes next? There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rockers, and each one has its own bolt holding it down. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove all 8 rockers, and we're going to take them out in the order at which they appear, so that we make sure that they go back onto the same position in the car that we took them from. So again, I've got a box laid out so I know where the front is and where the rear is. So these are 8 millimeters. Alright, so all 8 rockers are removed, and then we have this mounting bar, and that gets removed as well. And again, keep that so that it's in the right orientation when you put it back. So here's what we're left with. So we've got the yellow valve springs. I'm going to take a look in there with my light. I don't see any breakage, so we're good so far, but they are the bad yellow springs. Everything looks really nice and clean in there. Quite happy with the way that looks. So we're going to go ahead and start our removal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a pair of them. So I'll do this first pair here for you, and then it's the same procedure done over and over again on both sides of the engine. So let me walk you through what it looks like on one set of valve springs, and then we will I'll continue on and do the rest. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put in the base unit in place for the spring compressor. So it just goes in and utilizes the same mounting holes from that rocker bar that we took out. So I'm going to put this in just hand tight. The nice thing about this unit is I do not have to remove the push rods. So I put it in hand tight, and then I make sure that it is lined up in between the springs that I want to remove, and then go ahead and snug it down. So now what I'm going to do is I put the top bar on. But you want to make sure that you put some lubricant or oil on the top bar, because that's going to sit in there like that. And then you're going to thread this all the way in. So what you want to make sure is that this rod, or this threaded rod here, this bolt, is lubricated so that you don't have any binding when you're tightening this up. Okay, so one of the things I have around the shop is a bunch of these big syringes. So I just put some oil in that syringe, and then I can just kind of dribble it down the threads to make sure that I don't have any binding. So this goes on like this. This drops into place like this. And again, you want to make sure things are nice and lubricated. Now, before I do this, I need to put my compressed air in. So I'm going to get that all set up. So basically I have my hose that I showed you earlier. I'm going to feed that into the cylinder from where the spark plug came. And then just add some air pressure. So the hose is in, ready to do the first set of springs. Now I'm going to describe what I'm doing because if I lose some air pressure and my compressor comes on, you're not going to be able to hear me talk. So here's what's going to happen. So I'm going to connect the air up. The air is going to keep the valves up. I'm going to screw down this nut, and it will put pressure on the two springs. Then I will remove the keepers. Once they become free, I'll remove the keepers. And then once I remove the keepers, I'm going to back off that nut, take those springs out, put the new springs back on with the retainers and the keepers. All right, and here we go. So connect the air. So you'll notice that the springs are going down. So now I can take my magnet and grab those keepers. There's one. Two. Three, 4. I'm now going to back off that nut take this top plate off. And remove the two springs. New springs going into place. I like to give them a little squirt of assembly lube. Put the plate back up. Oop. Forgot my retainers. There we go. And you have to play around a little bit to make sure you're lining up properly. And compress the new springs. And then put your keepers back in. So there's one set. And again, sometimes, like I say, you have to fight a little bit with the, to get everything lined up properly. For the keepers to fall in. And then we back these off low, make sure everything gets caught. And we're all set. There's the first two. So the procedure for doing the others, exactly the same. So I'm going to go ahead and finish off the other 6 on this side, and then I'll come back and show you how to put it all back together. So all 8 of the springs are replaced on this side. Now we're going to put everything back together. So the first thing we need to do is put on our rail. And then the rockers one by one.
And what I like to do is put a little bit of a assembly lube.
Just on top of the push rods, on top of the spring or the valve, and line everything up. The nice thing about these rockers is they self-center. So once you get it relatively tight, they will actually center themselves. So there's a trick to doing this. So there's the easy way and then the right way, and really there's not much difference. The easy way is once you get all of these rockers snug, you just tighten everything to 22 foot-pounds and leave it, and it's done. The right way is to get your torque measurement when all of the valves are in their closed position. So that requires you to turn the engine over, or at least spin it by hand to get your valves lined up. So we're going to try and spin it by hand. It is a very tight fit in there. They don't make it easy to get at the crank bolt. I'm going to give it a try and see if I can actually get at that crank bolt. So we're just going to get all these lined up. Then we're going to snug them in. And then we'll attempt the torquing. And they get torqued to 22 foot-pounds. All right, this machines are relatively center over top. So I got my torque wrench set for 22 foot-pounds. And we're going to give it a little crank and bring them in.
So as you can see, this one is down. So we're going to readjust that one after. So if we take a close look at what we've got this one is down, and this one is down, and the rest are pretty much up. So what I'm going to do is just double check the ones that are up. 22, 22, 22, 22. There we go. So those ones are now snug. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to back off the two that are up on the lobe. Just back them off a little bit. And what we're going to do is we're going to spin the engine over by hand, or at least try to, and see if we can't bring those two valves to where they're closed. So I've got a 15/16 or even a 24 millimeter will fit on the crank bolt. There's not a lot of room, so I'm going to attempt to do this So I was able to turn the crank bolt, brought all of the valves to their closed position, cinched them all down to 22 foot-pounds, and now we've got all the rockers back in place. We've got all of the rail, everything is back in place, and we are ready to close up this side and move to the other. So now what we're going to do is we're going to put the valve cover back on. And we line her up. These things, these bolts, they get torqued to 9 foot-pounds. All right, so 9 foot-pounds. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're all closed up. So that completes one side. What we're going to do is the exact same thing on the other side. So I don't need to show you. You're just going to duplicate everything from this side over on the other side. So once I'm all finished, oh, forgot, we need to put our PVC line back in, our vent line. And I'll wait and put the coil pack on after, because I'm going to put the plugs back in once I finish the other side. And I also, I think I'm going to put some new plug wires since I've got it all apart, because I tugged hard on some of those plug wires. So I am going to replace those while I'm at it. So that's one side. I'll bring you back when the other side is all done. All right, the engine's all put back together after we replaced the valve springs with the Pack 1218s. So after the valve covers were back on, I went and reinstalled the coil packs. I did purchase some new wires, some new plug wires, so I put those on, hooked everything back up. There is a break-in procedure for new valve springs. The idea is you want to bring them up to temperature slowly, then let them cool. So what I did is started the engine, double-checked everything for leaks, and then I slowly brought the engine up to about 1500 RPM and held it there until the engine came up to temperature. Once it comes up to temperature, you shut off the engine and let it cool back down. Some people say you should do this a couple of times, so I'm going to do it twice before you actually take it out. And basically what that does is it runs the valves through a heat cycle before you actually take it out on the road and drop the hammer. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to let her cool down. I'll fire it up again, do the same thing, 1500 RPM, bring the temperature back up to operating temperature, let it cool down, do an oil change, and we're all set to go. So, I hope this helped you out. Step-by-step procedure, swapping out the valve springs for a new set of performance racing springs for the Z06 2002 with the LS6 engine. So until next time, Mr. G says, keep the rubber side down, everybody. Take care.